Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun! Dai-chan here! Today, I want to talk about the recently released anime film titled Bubble, not to be confused with the other brilliant anime movie titled Words Bubble Up Like Soda Pop. Nah, this Bubble is a film made up by the talented artists at Wit Studio. It features the same gorgeous visuals seen in the sinfully underrated Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress series. Given that Kabaneri is one of my absolute favorite anime, it's no surprise that I'm a huge fan of this movie too. To add to the mix, we've got music from Sawano Hiroyuki, ensuring that this film will no doubt wow you with its spectacle. I assume that if you're watching this video, you've already experienced the film for yourself, but if you haven't yet, you absolutely must. It's on Netflix right now, which is great for accessibility, but I worry that it might mean we'll never get to buy it on Blu-ray. I mean it, too. I'd personally give this film a recommendation of legendary. It's one of those anime that makes me proud to be alive in a time where I can see it. If you have any faith in me, please make it a priority to check this one out. Frustratingly, if you go by sites like My Anime List, you'll find people whining about Bubble's story, with a small consensus gathering on how confusing its story is. People don't seem to get the plot. I have a theory as to why. The film was written by Gen Urobuchi, the maniac who brought us Fate Zero, as well as Madoka Magica. These stories have some lofty concepts, so I can understand why people might struggle a bit. In comparison, however, I feel like Bubble's narrative was both simple and compelling. It uses a lot of visual storytelling that you might just miss if you aren't paying attention, which baffles me because I don't know why your eyes wouldn't be glued to every frame of this masterpiece. That said, if you've made it through the film and are having trouble piecing it all together, worry not, because in this video, I'll be answering the most important dramatic question: what is Uta? And by extension, what are the bubbles? Knowing this, more or less ties everything up in a precious little bow. Now, as far as I'm aware, there are no supplemental works that spell the lore out in any more detail than what the film provides us. Thankfully, it doesn't really need to. There's an air of mystique, but I'm confident that my interpretation of the events is perfectly serviceable. There may be other ways to interpret the film, but they honestly can't be too different from what I'm about to convey. In another sense, you can also consider this video a brief lore of the film. According to narration, Bubble's story begins when a swarm of mysterious yet fascinating bubbles suddenly begin falling from the sky all across the Earth. The film doesn't say it verbally, but it's clear these bubbles are some kind of alien life form that come from across the universe. First-person shots soaring across the solar system heavily insinuate this. At first, the bubbles fell all over the place, but after a surprise explosion at the Tokyo Tower in Japan, the bubbles gathered in Tokyo, concentrating themselves within a much larger bubble around the city. The tower remains an anomaly, a confusing vortex of distorted gravity that makes it difficult to access and analyze. As such, researchers aren't able to make any headway, as these bubbles defy gravitational physics in bizarre ways. The concentrated bubbles within Tokyo pop, flooding the city. From the water, dangerous currents form, and Japan citizens call them antlion pits, referencing a kind of death trap that antlions make to capture prey. Closer to the tower are black holes called spiderwebs. In general, the bubbles screw with gravity, causing various destroyed buildings and elements of the city to float. This, combined with the hazards, leads Japan's government to abandon Tokyo as its capital. The big explosion at Tokyo Tower killed a ton of people, leaving behind many orphans. A handful of these orphans decide to illegally enter Tokyo and treat it as a gravitational playground. The ruined city, and its loose physics, make it perfect for parkour, and so the orphans live their lives using parkour races to compete for food and resources. Reluctantly, the government permits this, but only with adult supervision. That's where Makoto and Shin come in. Makoto's a researcher who observes and analyzes the bubbles while looking after and educating the orphans. Shin is a man who pioneered doing parkour in Tokyo, but wound up injuring his leg while attempting to climb the tower. With that leg now replaced by a prosthetic, he's given up the sport, and instead uses his expertise to coach and oversee the orphans. It's not exactly obvious, but it's easy enough to tell that Shin came to Tokyo because his wife and child died in the explosion. Without them, he feels trying to live a normal life outside the bubble is unbearable, so he's more than sympathetic to the orphans' endeavors. The parkour rules are fairly simple. Different teams compete in races, starting from one point with the flag some distance away. Contestants are allowed to use any route to reach the flag, and can even try to knock each other into the water. In that regard, teams are encouraged to communicate and watch each other's backs, but in the end, all that matters is one player reaching the goal before anyone else. The most skilled orphan by far is Hibiki, a boy who claims to hear the bubbles singing. Hibiki wins matches for his team, the Blue Blazes, in part because he can confidently hop between the bubbles. It's dangerous, so none of the other orphans feel confident doing it. Hibiki pushes himself further, trying to parkour his way up the tower, but is never able to make it all the way. One night, pursuing the source of the bubble's song, he gets closer than ever to the top of the tower, only to get caught in a torrential wind that knocks him down to an antlion pit below. Caught in a train, on the verge of drowning, he is saved when a mysterious girl comes to his rescue, kissing him to provide oxygen. Hibiki later names this girl Uta, the Japanese word for song, after hearing her hum the exact same melody he hears from the tower. This brings us to our question: who is Uta, and what are the bubbles? There are two things that help answer these questions. First is the film's motif of the Little Mermaid. The original Little Mermaid, not the Disney one, is a dark children's story written by Hans Christian Andersen. It told of a kingdom of mermaids that normally kept to themselves in the ocean. One of these mermaids, however, became fascinated with humans and found herself falling in love with the handsome prince. When the prince nearly drowned, this mermaid, the Little Mermaid, saved him. In exchange for her lovely voice, the Little Mermaid takes a potion to become human. As a mute, she tries to win the prince's affection, but he instead marries another woman. Her mermaid sisters give her a dagger and tell her that by killing the prince, she can become a mermaid again. She refuses, instead throwing herself into the sea, where she dissolves into foam. Her selflessness is recognized by heaven, and she is given the chance to earn her soul by doing good deeds for humanity, after which she'll go to heaven like humans do. Bubble loosely models itself off this narrative, but while it actually includes the fairy tale as a diegetic part of their world, it certainly doesn't follow each and every detail. Instead, we have the basics. Uta, being referred to as a mermaid, turns from a bubble into a human girl in order to save Hibiki. She falls in love with Hibiki, but is unable to touch him, as doing so turns her body to sea foam. Her sisters, aka the Bubbles, want her to return to them, but she instead chooses to protect the boy she loves, even at the cost of her human body. In contrast to the fairy tale, Uta's voice is an important part of her character, and it's what allows Hibiki to grow closer to her. It's a better love story, to be honest, only using the Little Mermaid to help flavor the narrative and not be defined by it. Thus, it's better to answer this question using the film's own events. That is, the truth of Hibiki's past. I already mentioned that the bubbles are some form of alien creature, that much is clear. As to why they came to Earth and what they want from the planet, we may never know. What is clear, though, is that the bubbles, in general, consider humans to be a threat, at least initially. It's not as though they're afraid of humans running around and popping them, or something like that. Rather, it's more as if the bubbles are hesitant and afraid to try and bond with humans. Uta, however, is an exception. At first, she's just one of the many bubbles, but she stands out for her interest in people, specifically Hibiki. I imagine the bubbles are a sort of hive mind species, a race that adheres to a collective unconscious. The bubbles are meant to be homogeneous, all functioning in tandem with each other. In that regard, Uta is perhaps a deviation, some kind of accidental mutation from the norm. Unlike all the other bubbles, she is interested in humans and calls out to them through song. At first, Uta's song is too quiet for anyone to hear, except for Hibiki. This poor boy was born with hypersensitivity to sound, and with no feasible medical cure, he was given noise-canceling earmuffs and entrusted to a center for special needs kids like himself. On the day of the explosion, Hibiki was with that group on a trip to the tower. His hypersensitivity allowed him to hear Uta's song when nobody else could, and so he reached out to the lone bubble. She, in turn, floated towards him, forming a connection. The bubbles as a collective whole feared this interaction, much like how the Little Mermaid sisters feared her falling in love with the prince. Angered, the bubbles retaliated, causing the explosion. Hibiki would have certainly died in this incident, if not for Uta shielding him from the blast. When the bubbles isolated themselves to Tokyo, it was likely because they wanted to minimize contact with other humans. The antlion pits and spiderwebs are ways of deterring people. Tokyo Tower, which contains the majority of the bubbles, is especially hard to reach, as if the bubbles are rejecting any unwanted visitors. Over the next 5 years, Uta is still interested in humans, and when she sees Hibiki drowning, she desperately tries to save him. Through her own powers as an extraterrestrial, it seems like she's able to birth her own human body. We see it grow rapidly, mimicking how cells replicate. In the spur of the moment, she bases her human form on a billboard ad, which makes me happy that Japan is filled with cute anime girls. Otherwise, we could have wound up with some big bara dude. Anyway, the reason Uta can't touch Hibiki is a bit unclear. It's obviously meant to be a limitation, similar to the Little Mermaid's inability to speak or sing. It's a reminder that, no matter how human she may look, Uta cannot stay human forever. Nonetheless, she spends her time as a human learning about life on Earth, deepening her bond with Hibiki. Again, the collective hive mind of the bubbles, which she refers to as her sister, seem to reject this development. They threaten to cause another explosion, so Uta goes on her own to confront them at the tower. Hibiki, in turn, tries to rescue her, a natural result of his own love for her. He defies the other bubbles, parkouring his way up to the tower's core. Inside, we see Uta communicating with the bubbles, which also have shaped themselves into a human. My guess is they're trying to repair her foaming body and return her to them while keeping Hibiki away. Uta, however, rejects this and abandons her own kind to be with the boy she loves, even at the cost of her body. Hibiki and Uta embrace, finding their way back to the ground as her body foams away. She doesn't regret anything, instead cherishing how she's been able to experience what it's like to have a human heart capable of both happiness and sorrow. As expected, her body does dissolve into sea foam, but in doing so, it appears that Uta has reintegrated herself with the collective. In other words, that human heart of hers, those wonderful memories and emotions, become shared with the rest of the bubbles. With a newfound love and understanding for humans, the bubbles once again spread across the planet, sharing their song with everyone. Uta lives on through each and every one of these bubbles, which is clarified during the ending credits. To broadly answer the question, Uta is the bubbles, and the bubbles are Uta. They're all a collective alien species that came to Earth. One of these bubbles, Uta, is some sort of malfunction, mutation, or fluke that deviates from the collective in order to connect with humans. The collective fears and retaliates against this, but after reabsorbing Uta, it begins to share her understanding of the human heart, leading to harmony between themselves and Earthlings. Hibiki hasn't truly lost the woman he loves. Rather, her experiences resonate within all the bubbles around him. She's there, just not in the human body we're used to. Hopefully, that clears things up for you. I absolutely adore this movie, and I want you all to do the same, if possible. Did you come to the same conclusion as I did? Do you have your own theory as to what Uta and the bubbles are? Do you love this film as much as I do? Let me hear your thoughts in the comments below.
Before I go ahead and roll the credits, I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters. Video Gamer 75, C. James Torley, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, Otaku Mom, Jens Ballman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Freebrick, Cosmonaut, RNG or Shuffles 1498, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Johnny Tsunami, Link Pendrago, Caitlin P, Vladimir Rovna, Succubus Sakura, and SF Giants fan Mike. Thank you all so much. Thanks for watching.
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to OtakuDaiKun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!